arrived by way of a phone call from a trusted informant, and this time the trail didn't just brush up against a Middle Eastern terrorist cell, it led straight to the heart of a plot intended to kill thousands and to bring New York City to a standstill. The informant, Garrett Wilson, was a 6-foot-tall, 300-pound former Army Ranger who worked as a military police officer at a naval base in Philadelphia. A friendly, outgoing man, Wilson ran his own security business on the side, and back in the mid-1980s, while attending martial arts conferences in the New York area, he had gotten to know a number of militant New York black Muslims, including Richard Smith and other members of Al-Taqwa, a radical mosque in Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant section. Al-Taqwa had been engaged at that time in a war to rid its neighborhood of drug dealers, but beginning in the early 1990s, Wilson's Muslim clients had begun asking him to acquire material that, while legal, seemed peculiar for the security needs of a religious organization. Wilson ran the request by an officer in the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, who was also taken aback. The investigator sent a teletype to law enforcement agencies asking if anyone knew why members of a small mosque in Brooklyn were interested in obtaining rappelling equipment. Months passed before John Liguori, an agent in Corrigan's squad, remembered the query while mulling over Corrigan and McNally's gun-running investigation. Liguori had then contacted the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, which in turn hooked Corrigan and McNally up with Wilson. In the beginning, when Wilson was first funneling information to the JTTF about the mosque's paramilitary activities, Corrigan figured his unit had stumbled into another nest of felons, much like Marcus Robinson's crew. In November, the strategy paid an unexpected dividend. Corrigan got the news from Wilson. A Dr. Rashid had been calling for training. Did Corrigan want Wilson to meet with him? Wilson didn't need to ask twice. Using the telephone number Rashid had left on Wilson's beeper, Corrigan ran some background on this cipher. Rashid's given name turned out to be Clement Hampton L. He was 54 and worked in the dialysis unit of a Brooklyn hospital. More important, toll records showed that he had made recent calls to Abdel Rahman. On December 20th, Wilson met with Hampton L. in an apartment in Jersey City. Hampton L. wanted Wilson to train 8 to 10 men for an international jihad battalion. It occurred to Wilson that the type of instruction requested, sniper firing and frontal assaults on buildings, was also compatible with a terrorist operation in a U.S. city. It sounds to me like they either want to kidnap or kill someone, Wilson told Corrigan. Corrigan was alarmed. Everything seemed to be converging. Kahani and Shalabi's murders, Nosair and Abdel Rahman's increasingly blatant calls for jihad against the U.S., El Gabrowni and al-Shinawi's plans to bomb 12 Jewish locations, the search for detonator caps and assault weapons, and now this new round of paramilitary training. Corrigan recalls, until then, we were seeing things from the black side of the house, but now we were seeing the crossover to the Arabs. All I know is we were looking at each other and saying, no good can come of this. The irony of the situation was that just that past summer, the chief of New York's criminal division had called Corrigan and McNally into his office and told them that terrorism was dead, that from then on they would be working urban gang investigations. Neil Herman had objected, of course, and had even tried, as a last resort, to talk his NYPD counterpart, Deputy Inspector Dennis Cunningham, into assigning more detectives to the unit. Cunningham balked. The NYPD didn't have enough detectives, period. Herman, seated across the table from Cunningham in a lower Manhattan restaurant, didn't swallow this news without one last protest. What happens when the big one goes down, he asked. When the big one goes down, Cunningham said, I'll send you 500 detectives. There is no telling, of course, how much more the JTTF may have known in mid-December if Herman had been granted all the resources he'd requested over the previous year, or if Louis Napoli had been encouraged to hold on to Imad Salem. But the opportunities were there. On December 19th, just a day before Wilson's meeting with Hampton L., Mahmoud Abu Halima called Salem's cell phone. Salem, still simmering over his firing from the FBI, didn't return the call. Had Salem still been working as an informant for the JTTF, the World Trade Center bombing plot might well have been cracked before Salem hung up the phone. On January 7th, Wilson met with Hampton L. and Yahya Abu Ubaida, security chief for Al-Qifa, to firm up the arrangements. The training was set to commence that Saturday and go for 5 days at a shooting range in New Jersey. Wilson, who told Hampton L. he had a federal firearms license, would pick up the AK-47s Hampton L. was going to supply from Brooklyn and transport them on Friday night to New Jersey. The terms of the deal were straightforward. Wilson was to receive $5,000 for his instructional services and some military surplus equipment that Wilson had agreed to procure for Hampton L. The operation was set to go on January 13th. That afternoon, Carson Dunbar got wind of the plan and called Corrigan and Liguori in for a meeting. Dunbar was concerned that the Bureau was training potential terrorists, holy warriors, who may not be breaking the law now, but who might one day turn the skills they were acquiring against the United States. Dunbar decided to shut the whole operation down. Corrigan called Wilson to tell him to abort, just as Wilson was getting in his car to drive to the meeting place. Dunbar came up with a plausible alibi. Earlier that week, Iraqi warplanes had violated the no-fly zone and U.S. fighters had engaged them. Wilson, whose military background was well known to Hampton L., could tell him that his base was on heightened alert. As a result, he hadn't been able to contact Hampton L. the night before, and now would not be able to go through with the training. Corrigan and Liguori suggested a Plan B. They pointed out that Wilson would still have to give Hampton L. the equipment he'd purchased for him. Why not set up a meeting and run surveillance on the exchange? On January 15th, Wilson called Hampton L. for a meeting and was paged to the Sandman Hotel in Bordentown, New Jersey. Herman's squad preceded Wilson to the location and set up surveillance outside. Hampton L. wasn't there. Instead, Yahya Abu Ubaida and 2 unknown Middle Eastern men were waiting instead. The exchange went smoothly, and Wilson departed. Some of the surveillance team followed Ubaida back to the Al-Qifa Center in Brooklyn. The rest of the team, including Liguori and Corrigan, followed the 2 unknown men to an apartment on Fairview Avenue in Jersey City. "Do you believe where these guys are taking us?" Liguori asked Corrigan. The apartment belonged to Omar Abdelrahman, the blind sheikh, and the jihad group's spiritual leader. The circle was closing. Hampton L., already connected to the 12 Jewish locations plot through his meeting with El Shanawi and Imad Salem, was forming a jihad group whose members were linked to the Al-Qifa Center and Abdelrahman, mentor of Nosair. Corrigan recalls, "The whole thing was just screaming at you. Violence." The honchos at the Bureau didn't hear it quite the same way. However, they authorized round-the-clock surveillance on Ubaida for the rest of the week. The following day, he led investigators to Lincoln Park in Jersey City, where he held exercises for a group of men made up of Sudanese and Middle Easterners. Then, on the weekend, the investigators followed the same group to a farm near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where they attended a full-blown training camp. Investigators observed the men practicing martial arts, sniper firing, and rappelling. The chase was heating up. The JTTF was just a whisper away from the World Trade Center plot. But once more, Dunbar lost patience with the operation. The surveillances were already eating up manpower from other cases. With much of the action now taking place in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Dunbar wanted to transfer the entire case to the Newark office of the FBI. Herman's squad would continue to monitor Hampton L. and Ubaida, but Abdelrahman and his acolytes would no longer be in New York's jurisdiction.